perfect or perish. These are the two things you get when you are obsessed with a thing. You either perish with it or you make it perfect. So perfect that nobody could ever top the perfection, that it would influence a distinct vehicle model for decades to come. So perfect that it would become the hallmark of automobile excellence for many generations and remain one of the most influential cars ever built. This is the story of obsession and the perfection it begot. The story of a car that appealed to two distinct automobile markets and created a balance nobody ever thought possible. The story of a car that meant everything. This is the story of the granddaddy of hatchbacks. This is the story of the Volkswagen Golf GTI. The era was the 1970s, and the automobile world was in a dilemma. Maybe not that much of a dilemma, but it felt like one. If you wanted to get a car at the time, you had two options. You either go for an affordable one with little to no speed and performance, or you go for the sports cars like the Ferraris and Lamborghinis. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Well, not really. The problem was that the average working man could not afford Ferraris and Lamborghinis, but also wanted the speed and performance that these cars had to offer. Kinda dicey, right? In fact, the most common option to the masses at the time was the Volkswagen Beetle. Yes, the big, more like small, old Beetle. The Beetle was the people's car, living up to the manufacturer's name. It was affordable and did enough to take you home from work and for a few bottles with the boys on the weekends. There was nothing exciting about it, and it was as boring as a bug. Yeah, we know it looked like a bug. This sense of dissatisfaction was also felt at Volkswagen. In the 1970s, the Beetle was already 40 years old. The Second World War had not even started when the first Beetle rolled off the production line, and the boys at VW decided it was time to build another car that would retire the long-serving friend of the common man. Something affordable like the Beetle, but sexier than it. You know, like the girl from across the street that looked just like your girl but with a slimmer waist. Exactly. And so, in May 1974, the VW Golf was launched. It featured a front-mounted, water-cooled engine and a body that looked sharp and crisp. Contrary to popular opinion, the car was not named after the sport of golf. Rather, it was named after the Gulfstream wind, which is a common tradition with Volkswagen. The company named some of its cars after winds. Jetta and Sirocco were popular examples. So, the boys at Volkswagen were excited about the new car and its wind that would blow the company into a new dimension of prosperity. And as expected, it sold. Sold well, even, but not just as much as the Beetle. The demand for the Beetle was still high, and VW had no other choice than to keep churning out that bug of a car. Enter Anton Conrad, marketing exec at VW and an avid fan of motor racing. Also enter Alfons Leuenberg, test engineer at VW and another avid fan of motor racing. Together, fueled by their love and obsession with motor racing, these two men came up with the idea for sports golf. The idea was for a radical and more powerful Golf. They wanted the same body but a more powerful engine. A recipe for success, right? Well, not everyone shared this enthusiasm. Better put, the higher-ups at Volkswagen did not feel the same way. It turned out that while the Golf was in production in 1973, Conrad had shared this idea with his colleagues at VW in a memo, but because the company was busy with building the Golf that would retire the Beetle, they did not pay enough attention to it. Hell, some reports even mentioned that these top execs felt that there wasn't enough market for that type of radical car yet. Funny how top execs have always managed to get it wrong when it comes to knowing the type of cars that people want. Just stick to wearing suits and attending boring meetings, please. Anyway, like all revolutionaries, Conrad did not take no for an answer. Instead, he invited 6 of his friends and colleagues at VW to his house in Wolfsburg during the autumn of 1974 for some beer and sandwiches. And over this little refreshment, they plotted the plan that would bring the sport golf idea to life. They laid out the guideline for building a car that will combine the practicality and affordability of the Golf with the performance and speed of a race car. These 6 include Hermann Hablitzel, an engineer that played an important role in building the original Golf vehicle and probably knew more about the vehicle than anyone at Volkswagen. There was also Herbert Schuster, who was a suspension expert so good that he was said to fine-tune a car's suspension by what he felt in the seat of his pants. Frank Hawk built the legendary EA827 engine that powered the GTI, and Jürgen Adler worked on improving the chassis and interior of the vehicle. Gunter Kuhnel worked with Conrad at the press office and researched the motor racing events where the prototype would be tested. And Horst Dieter Svetlinski, good luck pronouncing that, did the market research for the vehicle and came up with its eventual name, Golf Grand Tour Injection, Golf GTI. Don't know about you, but it's pretty ironic that the person with the most tongue-twisting name ended up naming one of the greatest cars of all time. Work on the project continued silently and secretly till 1975, when the team had a prototype that they could share with other colleagues and higher-ups at VW. It was clear that this idea was going to be impressive, but in their usual manner, the top execs underestimated how impressive it was going to be. On the 28th of May 1975, they gave the green light for the production of the GTI, with a projected production quantity of 5,000 units. With the approval to move to production, 2 more people joined the team, and they were Herbert Schaefer and Gunhild Liljeqvist. Again, good luck with that name. Both were designers and were responsible for the enduring interior and exterior designers that the GTI has till today. The Golf GTI made its debut at the Frankfurt Motor Show in September 1975, featuring a 4-speed gearbox and a fuel-injected 4-cylinder engine that delivered 113 horsepower and did 0 to 60 in 10 seconds. This may not sound like much today, but in 1975 it was the real deal. It was sensational and absolutely remarkable. It was the perfect blend of a family hatchback car that also doubled as a high-performing speed machine, meaning it helped you haul groceries from the store and also helped you haul ass when you got in trouble. It was the perfect car. The first generation of the car was named Golf GTI Mk1, and it was an instant hit. By 1983, I lost my place. By 1983, when the company stopped producing the Mk1, it had already sold 423,000 units. So much for the projected production of 5,000 units. It was that much of a success, and yes, it finally retired the Beetle as the VW stopped selling the Bug in the US by 1979. This car single-handedly resuscitated the dying line of performance cars in the US and many parts of the world caused by the crippling fuel crisis. The Skyline GTR and the Mazda MX-5 had the GTI to thank for the idea and belief that people still wanted a speed machine. Many of the high-performance cars that you love today owe their idea and concept to the GTI. So even if you never liked or wanted the GTI, which is almost impossible if you lived in the late 70s and early 80s, there is a huge possibility that there is a car that you loved that was inspired by the VW Golf GTI. The GTI did not only bring back speed machines, but it also started the competition with hatchbacks. You know how Ford and Mustang started the pony car market segment in the 60s? That was exactly what VW did with the hatchbacks in the 70s and 80s. Many automakers started making hatchbacks, and soon people were spoiled for options. The second generation Mk2 quickly followed in 1984, and this time it was bigger and heavier. It also featured new designs such as a rear spoiler, dual headlights, a 5-speed gearbox, and optional power steering. Despite these new additions and an increase in weight, the Mk2 was able to deliver roughly the same acceleration and horsepower as the Mk1. 3 years later, in 1987, VW released the Golf GTI 16V. This new version came with a new engine that reduced the 0 to 60 acceleration to 8.9 seconds and upped the juice to 130 miles per hour. The production of the second generation GTI ended in 1991, and third gen showed up in the same year. The third generation, Mk3, was what many GTI fans referred to as the end of the classic GTIs. It came with a red GTI badge at the grille and tinted headlights while offering a small increase in acceleration and horsepower. The acceleration up to 8.7 seconds while the juice increased to 134 horsepower. The car remained on the market till 1997. For the fourth generation of the GTI, which was available by the end of 1997, customers had to buy the car as a trim level of the regular Golf and not as a separate model. Of course, this annoyed many fans, but that did not stop them from absolutely falling in love with the iconic car. The MK5 followed in 2003, and fans could heave a sigh of relief as VW returned the model as a separate offering. The MK5 came with a 16-valve 4-cylinder engine that accelerated from 0 to 60 in 7.2 seconds. The fifth generation also features new designs such as the futuristic Denver-style alloys and a sleek V-shaped honeycomb radiator grille. The MK5 also saw the return of classic elements like the red stripe, GTI badging, and tartan upholstery pattern, which was inspired by the tartan in the original Golf GTI MK1. The MK5 became an instant icon, and in 2006, the 30 Years of GTI edition was launched, with an even more powerful engine that generated nearly 230 horsepower. Production of the celebrated MK5 ended in mid-2008. It was followed, of course, by the 6th generation GTI MK6 that came with a more powerful engine that delivered 0 to 62 miles per hour in 6.9 seconds and a top speed of 150 miles per hour. In 2011, fans were treated to a pleasant surprise as the GTI was made available as a convertible for the first time. Later that same year, the Golf GTI Edition 35 was launched to celebrate the GTI's 35th birthday. Its first outing was at the legendary Nürburgring racetrack in Germany, where it completed a lap in what was, for the time, an impressively quick 8 minutes 38 seconds. It also clocked a 0 to 62 mile per hour time of just 6.6 seconds. The MK6 ended production in 2012. For the 7th generation GTI MK7, it was a different ballgame altogether. When the Golf GTI MK7 started production in the spring of 2013, it was launched with two different engines, the basic GTI and what was then the most powerful Golf ever produced, the Golf GTI Performance. The Performance was the first GTI to be built on Volkswagen's new modular transverse matrix (MQB) platform, which was both lighter and stronger, cutting its weight by a massive 42 kg. It became the first GTI to surpass 150 miles per hour. And then came the Golf GTI Club Sport, which further blurred the distinction between the GTI and its motorsport heritage. First seen in action at Portugal's Portimao race circuit in November 2015, the Club Sport achieved a 0 to 62 mile per hour of just 5.9 seconds, and it was just a taste of what was to come. In spring 2016, Volkswagen debuted an even more ferociously athletic GTI in the form of the Golf GTI Club Sport S. Released to coincide with the GTI's 40th birthday, it took the power-to-weight ratio to new lows by dispensing with the rear seats altogether and introducing an aluminum subframe. In the hands of Volkswagen Works driver Benjamin Leuchter, the Club Sport S demolished the previous record around Germany's Nürburgring Nordschleife track for front-wheel drive vehicles with an eye-wateringly fast lap time of 7 minutes 49.2 seconds. While the Golf GTI is currently in its 8th generation, the MK8, there are some other iconic additions and versions of the vehicle that have made history throughout the years. For instance, there is the Golf R with the all-wheel drive AWD mechanism that came with 292 horsepower. That's almost 300 horsepower in a family hatchback car. We also had the Golf R32 model, which was one of the versions of the MK5 model churned out between 2002 and 2004. It was built as an effort to revive the interest in the GTI lineup after the unpopular design decision made with the 4th generation of the hot hatchback. There was also the Harlequin-colored GTI that had a mixture of different body colors in 1996. It was an exciting and interesting departure from the monotonous black color that the GTI came with at the time. And finally, the history of the GTI would not be complete without a mention of the Golf VR6 model. The highlight of this car was its legendary VR6 engine that delivered between 172 and 178 horsepower. The Golf model was not the only car that used the VR6, as one of the Porsche Cayenne was also fitted with this monster engine. So there you have it, a car born out of an obsession that ended up being a blessing to people in the auto world in general.